It's interesting to note how Pokemon, which mostly uses science fiction as inspiration for its powerful computers that can store your animal friends, or its alternate universe hopping storylines, still uses the term potion for its primary healing item. These medicinal spray bottles have existed for as long as the series has, and despite many Pokemon having access to darkness magic or ghostly forms, the term potion still feels a little out of place to me. It ties the roleplay game back to its often fantasy-oriented genre, of course, but Pokemon's fantasy elements tend to be more eldritch on the big scales, and more like a spooky campfire story on the smaller scales. These spooky parts are often blown into huge works of fanfiction by creative minds in the community. Anyone who has played the first generation has had the experience of walking up to Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, a graveyard for lost Pokemon, and feeling a little uneasy. You battle some friendly trainers in the tower, people who are mourning their friends, but finding ways to move on. You encounter the vengeful spirit of a Pokemon killed by the dangerous gang Team Rocket, and rescue Mr. Fuji, its old caretaker. It's certainly not poop your pants scary, but the sequence tells a brief story about loving the less fortunate and moving on from loss. As a kid, it's a healthy introduction to the concept of death. As an adult, it's a fun change of pace in an otherwise upbeat game. But even adults might feel a shiver from the music that plays in this town. Those repeating dissonances are a bit enticing, though, aren't they? Don't you want to listen more? That white hand on your shoulder. There's only one way to get rid of it, don't you know? The Dungeons & Dragons players taught us this. All you have to do is... There exists a tale spread far across the internet known as Lavender Town Syndrome. This story describes a string of self-inflicted deaths among young players of Pokemon Red and Green after its release in 1996. Supposedly, subliminal messages are played through high-pitched tones only young people can hear, which drives them to insanity. This is, of course, just a spooky fanfiction story around a spooky area in a kid's video game. But you might not realize that if you just read the text of the story itself. Lavender Town Syndrome belongs to a genre of art known as Unfiction, not to be confused with nonfiction. An Unfiction story is a fictional story told in such a way that the illusion that it is true is not broken. The most popular example of this is found footage filmmaking, like the Blair Witch Project. Found footage turns the act of creation into a part of the fiction itself. Lavender Town Syndrome reads like a Wikipedia article, matter-of-factly describing a fake string of deaths as though they were a well-documented phenomenon. The author of this story is simultaneously some sort of fictional journalist taking notes on a tragedy, and also a real person in our world who is writing a fun, scary story for the internet. Lavender Town Syndrome is not just this one story, though. It is more regularly understood as a collection of overlapping and often contradictory stories inspired by the same idea of the high-pitched tone that drives you to insanity. Pokemon 731, a story that's, not aged very well and generally insensitive, says the tones and a famous glitch known as Missing No were created to brainwash kids into right-wing extremism. Sometimes the story is much less secular, and images of ghostly hands or zombies appear to drive kids crazy with occultic magic. Lavender Town Syndrome as a work might be better understood as a database, full of folders you can grab and edit as you'd like, creating derivative works of equal value to the canon as the original project. In the book Otaku, Japan's Database Animals, Hiroki Azuma uses the example of Neon Genesis Evangelion to describe this phenomenon. Many Evangelion fans required settings to empathize with the story's protagonist, to draw erotic illustrations of the heroine, and to build enormous robot figures, and showed obsessive interest in data to that extent, but beyond that, they seldom immersed themselves into the world of the works. Eva fans would go as far as to completely rewrite characters they liked, such as Rei, in an alternate universe with a different personality. Yet these fanfictions were critical elements of Eva's popularity, and collective canon. Whether you decide the tone is demonic or a nationalist, you're adding to a pool of work that is of equal canonical value to the original. Despite its supernatural nature, the idea of Lavender Town fits the Unfiction mold so well because it reflects many claims that were made about Pokemon in the early 2000s, and its fantasy role-playing contemporaries in the 80s and 90s. Those potions that heal our Pokemon are analogous to the health potions of Dungeons & Dragons, a game with a long history of absurd accusations of brainwashing and occultism. Lavender Town's database structure and its story of cats whose curiosity for the demonic gets the better of them isn't particularly original, although it's not really ripping off any particular book or movie either, but rather the Unfiction urban legends created by the new Christian right in the 1980s. In 1982, Bink Pulling passed away from a self-inflicted injury. His mother, Patricia Pulling, responded to such a tragedy by creating Bad, Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons, placing the blame for her son's death solely on the role-playing game. Dungeons & Dragons, for those unaware, is a collective storytelling game where players take the roles of different heroes in a fantastical world. It is not, as Patricia claimed, a satanic ritual sacrifice cult in which players lose their self-identity, and which was part of a broader conspiracy by Hollywood and leftists to kill off the youth. But we're jumping off the deep end a bit here. Let's start in the shallows. Why did Patricia Pulling target Dungeons & Dragons in the first place? How could an innocent role-playing game for dorks like you lead to someone's death? Well, in reality it didn't, but within the world of the conspiracy, it all starts with aesthetics and imagery. Yes, devils and demons exist in the Forgotten Realms, but they're evil-aligned. They attempt to trick and steal and pillage. They might curse a hero and ask for a ransom in return. D&D is explicitly anti-demonic at this point in time, but the mere existence of a pentagram or demon is enough to conjure the aesthetics of blasphemy, of breaking the Christian conservative norms. D&D, in the minds of the conspiracy theorist, is a database, where certain elements can be pulled and manipulated into new narratives, of equal, or in this case higher, value than the original. The actual content of the game as a work is irrelevant. This is point 1. Dungeons & Dragons was targeted for its aesthetics, not its content or messages. At the same time that Dungeons & Dragons was the target of ire, so were horror movies, metal music, violent television shows, and even Pokemon. The simple connection between all these groups is their aesthetics. An observant, but admittedly not so intelligent eye would begin to notice patterns in media popular with teenagers. The anti-Satan detective might begin scouring books and movies and vinyl. It wouldn't take long to find clues hidden in plain sight. Pokemon can evolve? Metal music uses upside-down crosses. It's everywhere. As the conspiracy gets grander, more explanations would be needed to justify how these theories could exist logically without being outed until just now. Collectively, anti-D&D activists would begin to write fanfiction about what D&D is. They would take the clues they found scattered throughout the pages of the rulebook and tie them to their pre-existing belief about who had power in the world and who controlled the media. They had to play their own form of mystery game and creative writing task. Point 2. Analyzing Satanism in art requires you to play. Once the process of creating a 40-page flyer of Unfiction was complete, Pulling attempted to use the document to convince schools to ban D&D. She was mostly unsuccessful, but some caved. Austin Wilson in Demons and Devils, the moral panic surrounding Dungeons & Dragons, which provided much of the context used in this section, explains that the purpose of all this play and mystery solving was to reassert power that parents felt they had lost. Quote, "These groups all place their central concern on what youth do with their free time. And American childhood and adolescence by the 1980s contained what some people saw as an obscene amount of free time. These youths were then able to decide what they wished to spend their time being entertained by, and the groups that will be discussed will have strong objections to some of the leisure activities that the youths might engage in. Point 3. Conspiracy theories are about power." I want to go more in depth on point 2 here. The mystery solving of the Satanic Panic is highly analogous to the intended play of ARGs, or alternate reality games. An ARG is a multimedia form of fiction, where the audience is directly involved in the shaping of the story as it happens. Game creators leave clues hidden on websites, in videos, or even in dead drops of in-game items in the real world. These clues are often encrypted and require some creative cipher work to get into a readable form. The ongoing ARG Giggleland, for example, has told its story through secret Tumblr accounts, hidden files on multiple websites, and even tasked the players with figuring out they needed to overlay a series of dots onto a real book referenced by an in-game character to find encrypted text which needed to be put through a key derivative function cipher to find a YouTube video. These puzzles are often obtuse and challenging, as you can see, requiring collective work from many members of the community to decode, explain, and craft into the story being told. Unfiction forum user SpaceBass, who originally defined the term ARG, wrote about an umbrella term that could encompass stories like this: chaotic fiction. I define chaotic fiction as a fictional construct that begins with a set of rules, uses those rules to run its scenario through an organic computer comprised of an audience and author, and ends with a finite body of work that was not predetermined. Usually, even in stories for which players' actions have a big impact on the story, there is a dividing line between the audience who participates and the author who runs and composes it. But this isn't universal. As we discussed, Lavender Town Syndrome acts more like a creative writing collection, where anyone can be simultaneously author and audience. The Satanic Panic doesn't have this line either. Remember earlier when Azuma described how fans of Evangelion as a database only needed a setting so that they could project their own ideas onto the characters and world? For Lavender Town, that setting is an imagined Japan where kids are dying from dangerous games. For the Satanic Panic, because the participants believe what they're saying is reality, that setting is the real world where kids are dying from dangerous games. Real people become characters to analyze, real art becomes puzzles to solve. Where the story goes is not predetermined. There was no concrete ending to the Satanic Panic going into it, because it was an ongoing collaborative game. The rules of the Satanic Panic ARG are the conservative values of the New Christian Right. What you come up with must be in-universe, aka not challenging to those values. Here's a concrete example of what this play looked like from Wilson. Some secular anti-gaming activists did exist. These activists centered their critique of the game on the idea of immersion. First promoted by William Deere following the disappearance of Dallas Egbert in 1979, this theory held that D&D and other similar games would draw young people in and make them unable to distinguish fact from fantasy. Egbert's involvement with D&D fueled this idea. The fictionalization of Egbert's disappearance can be seen in Mazes and Monsters, which debuted as a made-for-TV movie in 1982. This quick turnaround from real-life occurrences to the media circus perpetuated by William Deere, a detective hired to find Egbert, to the film in a span of a few short years shows a degree of fascination with the subject. As the 2000s rolled around, the momentum of the Satanic Panic was halting, but rather than disappear, the conspiracy evolved into something new. Like Lavender Town's many interpretations, QAnon has a loose premise with some rules, but does not have a strict storyline. It is a conspiracy theory that encapsulates almost every reactionary idea of the past 2 decades under one banner, centered on a doomsday scenario surrounding Donald Trump. The premise is that Q, an anonymous poster on sites like 4chan, is a political insider leaking the highest government secrets possible. The exact nature and continuity of the secrets themselves are not particularly important to its believers, and what the government is actually doing is something that each individual can make up for themselves in smaller subgroups. But the purpose of these secrets is to explain why Donald Trump is going to enact a far-reaching plan called the Storm, a rapture-like event where every enemy of the right will be arrested or publicly executed, and only the loyal will ascend into the new utopia created in its wake. But unlike the Satanic Panic, for which there isn't a central author at all, Q himself feeds the storyline through drops. A Q drop is a post by Q, usually written as a series of esoteric questions that guide the audience in the direction the author is looking for. For example, how did George Soros replace Family Y is analogous to the cryptic hints of Giggleland guiding the audience towards the Tumblr page of an important character. Much of Giggleland's gameplay takes place on a Discord server, where players all work together to share ideas and theories to try and crack the case. Q skews a bit older, and therefore appears more frequently on apps like Twitter and Facebook, but the community aspect is still the same. In QAnon, this is known as decoding, and is the primary form of play. There is a meaningful difference though. Giggleland has a set solution that is meant to be discovered in-game. The solution to a Q drop, on the other hand, is whatever the audience's internal biases decide it is. The appeal of playing this ARG is twofold. Firstly, it reinforces your pre-existing beliefs and allows you to feel correct by simplifying the entire world to a single scapegoat. Secondly, for the people involved, it's fun, and it builds community. It's fun to roleplay as a detective, discovering biblical secrets hidden for millennium. It allows you to make like-minded friends who have the same values and beliefs as you. But unlike Giggleland, where this community and your actions only impact a fictional world, the actions of Q-believers impact the real world. Q-believers have attempted to assassinate politicians. They've kidnapped their kids in domestic disputes. They've elected a fascist to power in the United States, with the hopes that he'll mass execute people they don't like. Harming marginalized people, for whom Q-believers have fabricated stories about their danger, is this group's idea of fun, because it gives them power.